and benefits. Back then, the mortality rate was very high for individuals with spinal cord injuries, and benefits were very, I guess I'll have to say, poor at the time. And what I mean by that is when we first entered World War II, the monthly disability compensation for veterans with paraplegia was around $112 to $175 a month. And to put that in perspective a little bit, that's what the monetary payment is today for just a 10% disability. So obviously we've come a long way since then, and a lot of that is due to those World War II veterans who formed PVA in 1946, and all those that have followed, to include people like Al Kovac, who's not just editor of PN, but he's a past PVA president as well. So we've come a long way. We're really proud of our organization, and next year we'll be celebrating 80 years. And I just recently celebrated 30 years with PVA last month. We're the only organization that has our own medical services department, our own architecture department, our own sports department, and government relations department, which continuously is advocating for improved benefits for the veterans and survivors we serve. And one of them that we'll talk to about at the end of the presentation is new legislation that offers, that provides veterans the ability to get an additional auto grant, which was historically just a one-time grant. So I'll explain the roadmap just a little bit. Some of the terms on the roadmap are VA Form 21-4502, and that's the application itself for the automobile grant. Another one of the key forms, I don't know if it's on the presentation or not, but it's VA Form 10-1394, and that's the application for automobile adaptive equipment. So these are important terms used by VA. Service connected. Service connected means that VA's determined through an official VA rating decision that due to when a veteran has an injury or disease that they find is connected to military service, they'll make an official VA rating decision. For example, if a veteran sustains paraplegia on active duty, their paraplegia is service connected to their military service. With respect to how VA makes that rating decision, generally what they'll do is they'll provide 100% for loss of use of both feet. Then there's a whole host of other disabilities that are associated with that. And the same can be true with MS and other disabilities. And when the VA makes that decision and they grant 100% or they grant higher than that, at the bottom of the rating decision, they add ancillary benefits. And by ancillary benefits, I mean they'll add eligibility to the automobile grant, and they'll add eligibility to the specially adapted housing grant on that rating decision. So before applying for the auto grant, that rating decision has to be promulgated, showing that eligibility is there. Non-service connected means that an individual has a disability today, but that disability may have been incurred 10, 20, 30, 40 years after military service. So it has nothing to do with the military service. However, even those veterans are still eligible to certain benefits, one being healthcare, another in some instances, a non-service connected pension, and as we'll get to at the bottom of the presentation, vehicle modifications. The other commonly used term is DD-214. Anyone who served in the military doesn't only know what that document is, it's their official separation or retirement from service in the military, but it's also the most important document that a veteran ever receives from the military, because that's necessary to prove military service and create entitlement to not just VA federal benefits, but often state benefits as well. So that's really an important document, and it's advisable that everyone has it, keeps it in safekeeping, puts it in a safe deposit box, or somehow keeps it safe. So currently, the amount for the automobile grant is $26,417.20. However, that's increased every year on October 1st. However, we don't have the new rate yet. The VA should probably publish that in a few weeks. In order to receive the auto grant, however, the veteran has to be service connected for at least one of the following conditions. Veteran has to have loss or permanent loss of use of one or both feet, or loss or permanent loss of use of one or both hands, or in effect blindness, a severe burn injury, or ALS, or ankylosis in one or both knees or hips. But that only qualifies individuals for adaptive equipment, not the $26,000 auto grant itself. So the minimum requirement generally is at least loss of use of one foot. When I mean by what VA means by loss or loss of use, that can either be anatomical loss, or because that foot or lower extremity is so impaired by disease or injury that basically that extremity, this is a bit complicated to explain, but that foot or that lower extremity would be equally well served by an amputation. That doesn't mean an amputation is advocated for. It just means that's how severe the injury or disability is due to that foot or lower extremity. And it's basically the same with loss of use of one or both hands, so on and so forth. Next slide, please, Monique.
Yep, next up.
So once the VA promulgates, makes it official, a VA rating decision that grants service connection for paraplegia, ALS, multiple sclerosis, so on and so forth. As explained earlier, the bottom of the decision, the ancillary benefits are provided, meaning the auto grant and adaptive equipment, as well as the specially adapted housing grant. After eligibility has been established, what we normally do is, if a veteran wants to use the auto grant, we'll complete the 4502 and we'll submit it to the VA. Right now, it's taking probably 3 to 4 months from the time we submit a 4502 and the VA processes it and certifies it. By certify, what I mean is someone in a higher level position at the VA will sign off on that 4502 certifying that the veteran is eligible. Once that's done, with the 4502, VA regional office will prepare an auto grant award letter. That award letter will say, "Dear Mr. Smith," whatever the name is, "you've been approved for the $26,000 automobile grant." And then it'll provide instructions in that letter. And with the letter, they send the original 4502 that's been certified back to the veteran. Just a note there in purple, basically we do all this stuff. If we're a veterans representative, we take care of all these things. So we kind of know the ins and outs. And what I mean by that is, I don't like to use the term automatic when it comes to anything in the VA, but if a veteran has ALS, for example, because ALS is such a fatal, rapidly progressive disease with no cure, benefits are a little bit different, and they've improved over the years, to where if a veteran has ALS, it's almost automatic to get 100%, and it's almost automatic, or it is basically on the rating decision, it'll show eligibility for the auto and SAH grant has been established. So when we submit a disability claim for ALS, with that disability claim, which is VA Form 21-526, we also submit the 4502 for the auto grant, as well as the application for the specially adapted housing grant. So they're all done at once. So when things are pretty automatic or obvious, like even paraplegia or quadriplegia, we submit all of them together because we know that loss of use is going to be granted in those decisions, and therefore eligibility is going to be established for the automobile and SAH grants. Next slide, please, Monique.
You got it. Award letter.
Okay. So we talked about this a bit. The VA gets the 4502 certified, and once that's certified, they put together an award letter and send it out to the veteran. Then the veteran can start working on the process of looking for a vehicle. I would caution, however, before going to a dealer, and definitely before signing anything or making any agreements, that veterans first speak with their healthcare provider for several reasons. First of all, the healthcare provider has to initiate a consult or prescription to driver's training services. And what'll happen there is often, and Eddie can talk about this a little bit in more detail than I can, but often a veteran has to take driver training. But in addition to that, someone like Eddie and others, KTs, OTs, PTs, they write the actual prescription or consult for the different adaptive equipment that's needed based upon a veteran's disability. Then they provide that consult to prosthetics. So it all starts with, it's not just AAE, almost anything in the VA, even if somebody needed something as simple as a cane. If they needed a cane from prosthetics, it starts with a primary care provider or other healthcare provider submitting a consult for that particular item. So it's the same with adaptive equipment. And before making any, like I said, any agreements, it's really important to speak with your healthcare provider, get the prescription, and then also speak with prosthetics. The next, I don't want to go into too much because there's a lot of changes over the last, I would say, 7 months with respect to prosthetics, sensory aid, and sensory aid services at VA National Office, where there's somewhat of a disagreement, at least with us and prosthetics, as far as what constitutes adaptive equipment. And what I mean by that is the specific statute written by Congress that authorizes adaptive equipment specifically mentions automatic transmission, power steering, power brakes, power windows, power seats, air conditioning, and a whole host of other things. But that's just the minimum. So in our view, when a veteran is authorized adaptive equipment, they should also be authorized reimbursement for these specific items. And generally, people like Eddie, they provide that in the consult. However, whether prosthetics always reimburses veterans for that is another matter. So we're kind of back and forth where, we want to ensure that all veterans entitled to the auto grant and adaptive equipment not only get all the adaptive equipment they're entitled to, but reimbursed for what VA and manufacturers refer to as OEM, original equipment manufacturer. So next slide, please. I think I'm getting ahead.
AAE prescription.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I think I'm getting ahead of myself, or I'm speaking too fast because I kind of went over this. So what happens is once driver training services, the KT, OT, PT sends the prescription to prosthetics, they do something similar as to what VBA does. They check a veteran's records and they check to make sure the veteran is eligible. And of course, one of the main eligibility criteria is the veteran's eligible for the auto grant. So they check eligibility. They also check to see if a veteran already has received adapted vehicles in the past, how many they currently have on their record, because an individual can't have more than 2 vehicles adapted within a 4-year period. So what happens is once the prescription goes to prosthetics, they do the same thing. They verify eligibility. Then they'll provide, similar to VBA, an award letter. And they'll send the award letter to the veteran. And with that letter, it'll specify the different adaptive equipment that was prescribed and that the veteran is eligible to receive. The veteran can then complete part 1 of the 1394, which is the application for automobile adaptive equipment. They have to complete that section, sign it, and then they can bring it to a dealer with the prosthetics approval letter and with the 4502, which they receive from VBA that authorizes the auto grant. Then modifications can begin. And just, another cautionary note, there's around 152 different VA medical centers and facilities and clinics around the country and Puerto Rico, and quite a few dealers as well. And not everyone follows the exact same process down to the T. So again, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. It's really important that, you start with your PCP or other healthcare provider, whether it's a spinal cord injury physician, so that they can put in the consult. Then contact your prosthetics office at your local VA medical center to ensure you're following the correct process for that VA medical center. So in order for a dealer to receive payment for the vehicle they just sold a veteran, a dealer has to submit VA form. That's the application for the auto grant, again, that a veteran has, that's been certified by VA. Once a veteran receives the vehicle, they have to sign at the bottom of the 4502 indicating they did receive the vehicle. And then the dealer submits that 4502 to the closest local VA regional office finance department. I can't tell you off the top of my head how long that takes. Just like I said, there's 152 medical centers. There's 56 different VA regional offices, and some of them have started consolidating different departments. So some individuals in the finance department also have other responsibilities. But maybe Jeremy can talk a little bit more about that. But generally, I would think within a month of receipt of that 4502, the VA makes payment. And there's also, a lot of changes as far as improving the process and, I know in the past VA has talked about improving this system in order to get payments to dealers on a faster, on a more expedited basis. But so after the 4502 is submitted, the 1394 has to be submitted with a window sticker, itemized final invoice, paid receipt, or bill of sale must be provided and submitted as well. Even though I would say the majority of payments for the AAE go to the dealer, some of the things that I mentioned earlier, as far as specific items in the statute, automatic transmission, power steering, and those items, that generally that's generally a separate payment made to veterans. So as I mentioned at the outset, what non-service connected means is that individuals can sustain some type of injury over the course of my career. I've known a lot of veterans who 20, 30 years after service get into a car accident and sustain paraplegia, or they fell off a roof or a ladder and sustain paraplegia. Even though those disabilities have nothing to do with military service from 10, 30, 40, 50 years ago, there's still benefits. Every veteran signs, on the dotted line, and whether they get hurt or not, you're still kind of signing your life away to the United States government for 4 years or however long you serve. So there are still benefits that Congress authorizes for non-service connected veterans. The veterans have to be enrolled in the VA healthcare system, and whether it's with respect to vehicle modifications or not, we highly encourage everyone to be enrolled in the VA healthcare system, even if they're non-service connected, because there are a lot of things provided in the VA health under the umbrella of the VA healthcare system that are not provided in the private sector by private insurance or Medicare or other entities. And what I mean by that is even this here, vehicle modifications. A private insurance company or Medicare is not going to generally pay, I can't think of any that would pay, to modify a van for a veteran to provide a lift and some of the other modifications that the VA can pay for if a veteran has a van or they want to purchase a van. Is not just a ramp to get in and out of the vehicle, but also to lower the floor if necessary, raise the roof if necessary, wheelchair tie downs, and things of that nature. One of the things that I think, next slide, Monique, please. Thank you. Operational equipment. One of the things that VA doesn't provide in these situations is hand controls and low effort brakes and power steering and things of that nature. It doesn't make much sense to me considering everything else they'll provide, but again, this is for non-service connected vets who are injured, sustain some type of disability that has nothing to do with their military service. Whatever that cost is to make those modifications to the van can't exceed those that are eligible for VBA's auto adaptive equipment and auto grant and auto adaptive equipment program. I don't think I've ever seen the cost of modifications like that even come close to AAE, to the automobile adaptive equipment program. But in any event, and also no more than two vehicles modified within a 4-year period. Again, next slide, Monique talks about pre-authorization. And similar to what I mentioned earlier with respect to the automobile grant and adaptive equipment for service-connected veterans, it's the same with respect to vehicle modifications. It has to be pre-authorized. So again, please start with your PCP or other physician. They would need to put in a consult. And again, it's really important to speak with the prosthetics office at your local VA medical center. And especially now, and I think I'm being redundant a little bit, but the reason I am is because there's been so many changes over the last couple of months. And in fact, even, the last couple of years, every time there's a change in administration and a change in Congress, some benefits are expanded and some may not be expanded. So it's really important that with so much changing, over the last couple of years and the last couple of months, that no one goes out and just starts buying vehicles, or whether it's service connected or non-service connected, that you all check with your PCPs and prosthetics office before taking any action. We have seen, I don't want to say a lot, but enough to be concerned over the last year, where there are some instances where even VA has made a mistake. And what I mean by that is they've sent a letter to a veteran saying, you've been approved for this adaptive equipment, and here's a list of all the things you're eligible for. And a veteran goes out and gets a vehicle. And then a month later, when a dealer or is trying to get reimbursed, the VA says they made a mistake. This veteran has already had 2 vehicles adapted within the last 4 years. And, we appeal those issues and we fight those issues, but it's happened enough times that it is a concern, which is why I'm being a little bit redundant with it. The last slide, Monique, please. So I want to say historically, the auto grant was a once in a lifetime grant. And at the outset, I mentioned now it's $26,142, I think. When I first started with PVA, it was only $5,500. And as I said, it was just a once in a lifetime grant. This changed effective January 1st, 2023, when the Auto and Education Improvement Act was signed. And thanks to the great advocacy of PVA and, especially our government relations department, I don't know how many vehicles last a lifetime. There's probably none. And I think, a lot of people may need new vehicles every couple of years. And with veterans, especially individuals with paraplegia, quadriplegia, ALS or MS, but more specifically, I guess I would say paraplegia and quadriplegia, often put a lot of miles on vehicles rather quickly. We were talking, earlier to Al, and, flying on an airplane, if you're in a wheelchair, is not an easy thing to do. It's not convenient. It's not easy. Wheelchairs get damaged, and, it's probably not the most pleasant experience in the world. So a lot of individuals, they do a lot of driving, whether it's to seminars and other things so miles rack up rather quickly. So once in a lifetime serves, is not very helpful. So PVA, lobbied for this for quite some time. And the way the law is now is, if a veteran used the original grant 30 more years ago, they're eligible, they're entitled to an additional grant right now. And since that act was passed, I believe we've probably filed around 400 claims for the additional grants for veterans who received it 30 more years ago. If anyone in this meeting has gone through that, especially for the first year or so, that was not a simple process. When new laws are enacted, it can take years for the regulations to be implemented. So it hasn't been an easy process for us either, but VA is finally on the right path as far as how to get these things processed correctly. And starting in not 10 years, now it's only 12 years. I mean, 8 years, I think. Starting in 2033, if more than 10 years have passed since the person last received the grant, they can receive it again. And then every 10 years, they can receive an additional grant. So it's not perfect. That's how legislation works. But, I think our government relations department and so many in PVA deserve a lot of credit for getting that done, especially in such a divided Congress. So I apologize if I went too fast and too long, but I'm following my presentation on another computer because unfortunately I can't see the other one. But thanks very much for listening.
It was great, Joe. Thank you so much. And before we get to Ed, when we started this presentation, we told you there would be a lot of information while we're delivering. So there is a ton of information, but this is recorded. We will have follow-up documents, questions. I see them coming through the chat, and Jeremiah is taking care of those, so keep coming through. And Ed, let's talk about driving.
Sounds good. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Joe. My name is Edward Duwag. I go by Ed or Eddie, as some of you guys know. I'm a registered kinesiotherapist at the Timur Rubin VA Medical Center in Long Beach. I've been doing driver rehab here for a little more than 22 years. It'll be my 23rd anniversary, February of next year. Next slide, please. So what I'll be discussing is the process for wanting to drive with adaptive equipment and how that relates to auto-adaptive AAE, as well as possible non-4502 or non-AAE patients. So some terminology I would like to discuss: the 4502 versus the non-4502. There's a lot of confusion between service-connected versus non-service-connected. On the clinical side, we talk about 4502, the patients who qualify for the auto-adaptive grant from VBA. They've been approved, and all that information that Joe went over about adaptations every two adaptations every 4 years are eligible for, versus the non-4502 patients that could be service-connected, but service-connected rating does not relate to getting the 4502 eligibility approval. So just some things to consider, because when patients come in here to my clinic and they say, I'm service-connected, I qualify for the 4502, they may not be qualifying for the 4502 because their service-connected disability does not relate to the eligibility requirements. And someone could be service-connected, but their eligibility requirements does not relate to the lack of use. So I may have to do the non-4502 assistance that Joe was talking about for ingress, egress, non-operational equipment. So to start, when we do get a referral for driver rehabilitation or a vehicle evaluation, as Joe was, always reiterating, we have to get a consultation from the doctor. If it's in-house, say for instance, Long Beach, then primary care and or rehab could send the orders directly to my driver rehabilitation clinic. If they're out of the catchment area, then we will need an IFC, inter-facility consult, to be generated by the primary care doctor or rehab provider at that veteran's home VA. And then that consult gets sent to rehab here in Long Beach. When the rehab doctor here in Long Beach reviews that consultation, they will go ahead and forward that consultation to my clinic, and then our schedule will contact that veteran for the evaluation. That evaluation, depending on what needs to be evaluated, may be a video appointment and or a behind the wheel face-to-face evaluation. When we do driver evaluation in the clinic, we will have to do a chart review with the veteran to ensure that all the medical history is up to snuff and accurate. We will also do clinical evaluation that consists of range of motion of the extremities, depending on what needs for adaptive equipment, for hand controls, left foot accelerator, maybe factory equipment. We will test vision screening to ensure they meet the standards within the state for the evaluation. We will test their cognition and may put them on my simulator to assess their judgment skills, reaction time, decision-making skills, etc. If they meet all the requirements for the clinical evaluation with or without adaptive equipment, then we go behind the wheel. Here in Long Beach, we have 6 vehicles here on campus. Each vehicle is adapted with different equipment depending on what the veteran needs. We will take them on hospital grounds, getting used to the vehicle initially with or without adaptive equipment. They will have to meet the standards for full stops, not crossing the limit line, using the blinker and smooth turns. If they're able to pass those requirements, then we take them into residential driving, which is Cal State Long Beach area next to the VA. They will do lane changes, parking to the right, reversing 3-point turn maneuvers, as well as simple left and right turns. Again, if they meet those requirements, then we progress to the next level, which is complex traffic, downtown Long Beach area, where there's a lot of distractions, a lot of stimuli, narrow streets, timely decision-making assessment. It is actually the ultimate form of driving with distractions coming from the environment as well as from me. Not that I'm purposely trying to distract the veteran, but true driving is having all the distractions, all the stimuli in the environment, be conversation with me, or be it that little child crossing the street in front of a school zone, and be able to handle that with or without adaptive equipment. If complex traffic stage is completed, progression to freeway driving will be performed. If they're able to pass all those requirements and they need to get their license reinstated and or have restrictions on their license with adaptive equipment, then I will be the go-between between themselves as well as the medical board of DMV here in the state of California. In the state of California, it's called the Driver Safety Office, but every state has something equivalent for that to assess the medical history of the potential driver and to schedule the behind the wheel with the state. If they pass all those requirements, then I'm also involved with the prescription of the equipment. So that consultation that came from the provider, that could just be for a driver safety evaluation, could be completed as a safe independent driver with adaptive equipment, and then it will end with my prescription so that it could match what the vendor, the mobility vendor, is putting on the bid so that prosthetics could review it and potentially approve it. If it does get approved, that vehicle that is for ingress, egress, as well as driver equipment, then a post-inspection is needed to ensure all adaptive equipment is in the vehicle and working correctly. This will allow the veteran to be rest assured that the equipment is functional for him or her and is safe to be used, and that at that time the vehicle will be released to the veteran to be used. Okay, so that's the process in a nutshell. Very common is the reevaluation for newer vehicles and or driver equipment. When a veteran under the 4502 is interested in another vehicle, meaning they want to get a second vehicle on record within that 4-year span or later, right? Then a new order needs to be generated from the provider. You may not have to go through the whole process of clinical evaluation as well as behind the wheel, but at the very least, a tele-rehab or a video appointment needs to be completed to ensure that the equipment is still functional for the veteran and they are still able to transfer either in the driver's side or passenger side or drive from the wheelchair safely. This is to make sure that the equipment that the VA is prescribing is functional for the veteran and safe. It's just another layer of checks and balances to make sure that the VA is not issuing equipment that's unsafe and or the VA is issuing equipment that is not appropriate for the veteran to use. And I will answer all questions later in relation to this. We will move forward to Al's story now.
Thanks, Ed. You know, every time I hear these presentations like this, it's assuring to know that there are people who have my back when I go to buy a van. I've had a lot of problems this year. I have 2 vehicles, and I tried to buy a van because I was due a new van, but the VA said no. I was actually denied. And I said, I can't believe that you guys are denying my van. I have the purchase date right here. And what it turns out is that the VA took an entire year to reimburse the dealership for the van. So they were going off of the reimbursement date, not the date that I actually bought the vehicle. So I reached out to PVA and the VA, and we're working through that right now. I also had problems with some equipment that broke, relating to the equipment, the adaptive equipment, and I had to wait, I think it was like 6 weeks for the VA to actually pre-approve the repair. And but fortunately, the folks at United Access worked with the VA directly to get that done. And I've had some other issues with the van that I called United Access dealership, and they said it was a dealership Toyota issue, and it was. And then right now I found out that I have to get reevaluated, as Ed was talking about. Right before we went live, Ed reassured me about how to get that done. It's a little challenging in San Diego because we don't have anybody down here doing that, so we have to rely on the folks up in Long Beach to do that for us. So I want to thank all of you, whether you're Jeremiah at United Access or Ed at the VA or Joe at the PVA. All 3 of you I know have my you have my back. Hate to use that cliche, but I always feel comfortable in going to any of you guys to help me through any challenges I might have with my adaptive equipment. So thank you all. Well, is this where you take over?
Yeah, like take it over. All right, so we've had some great pre-submitted questions. Let me share my screen and we'll get into those. And I still see some live questions coming in on the chat, so keep those coming. So the first question, Eddie, we're going to tee this over to you. The question is, given the significant barriers that veterans with high-level spinal cord injuries, quadriplegia, and unilateral upper extremity impairments face, why is it so challenging for them to access specialized evaluation, training, and advanced vehicle configurations such as drive-by-wire systems, voice-activated controls, and automated transfer seats through the VA or local providers, particularly in regions like Los Angeles? What strategies or policies could ensure equitable access to these?
All right, sounds good. This is a question that comes up not quite often, but it came up before. To answer that question, individuals, patients that drive, I like to call these type of vehicles high-tech vehicles. And for patients in general that need high-tech equipment, it's very specific. There are several manufacturers out there, such as EMC, Joysteer that was out there before, that's currently no longer in the United States being a representative. You have Paravan out there that might still be represented in the States, but is not official. So those are just some main players out there for high tech. If we have those vehicles on our property at the VA and no one fits the criteria to use it, then it's a waste of taxpayer dollars just literally sitting on our VA lot. The thing is, it doesn't mean that just because a veteran comes in and could potentially use that vehicle, we should say no to that veteran. For the driver rehab at the VA, we have tried to figure out if vehicles are at least, at the very least, present on the East Coast as well as the West Coast, so that if a veteran is referred from San Diego, hypothetically, at least someone on the West Coast could do the evaluation compared to sending someone out to Tampa on the East Coast to do the evaluation. We are still in the process of trying to do that. Unfortunately, there is no high-tech vehicle on the West Coast that's functional within the VA. I'm in the process of trying to get one part of my fleet, but as we know right now, there is no purchasing power for any departments at the VA because of the freeze on that. On top of that too, just because there is a high-tech vehicle on the West Coast or East Coast, it doesn't mean that that equipment per se will fit that veteran's needs. As I told you earlier, EMC, Paravan, Joysteer, even though those are high-tech, they're very specific of the functions needed by that veteran or that driver in general to use. In general, we know that this is a need. We're trying to resolve the need, and right now, a particular veteran of mine, we're trying to do community care. If outside providers are willing to work with the VA to do that work for that particular veteran. The drawback about that community care is twofold. Number one, does that community care provider have that vehicle to do the training? And number two, will that community care provider be willing to work with the VA? Because unfortunately, from my understanding, payment from the VA won't be as much as the outside provider doing a private evaluation with someone else out of pocket. We could talk to these providers and try to convince them to assist us in those matters. However, since they're outside providers and they're private, they can decide not to work with us in general overall. So hopefully that answers the questions at the end. And Jeremiah could probably give my email as well as my cell phone number or my clinic number to whoever asked this question, and we could talk in detail and try to assist you as much as possible. But that's the barriers that we're facing for high-tech driving systems.
Thanks, Ed. I think, Jeremiah, you've got the next one. Am I allowed to negotiate chassis prices with a mobility consultant?
Yeah, thanks, Monique. And the easy answer is yes. So the VA has their contracted pricing for all of the mobility equipment, the ramps, all of those setups. When it comes to what you must pay for as the veteran on the chassis, I highly recommend going to dealerships, talking to them, working out and finding which one is going to work with you, not just on price, but you're going to have long-term care of that vehicle with them and find a service department and a facility that's willing to help you with those needs all the way through. But the easy answer is yes, you are allowed to negotiate price with dealers.
Thanks, Jeremiah. You want to take the next one?
Yeah, I'll take the next one too. Is there help with acquiring a wheelchair accessible vehicle to help my disabled veteran spouse get out of his veteran's home for a break to visit home and family? There is no specific VA program for that unless they apply for the 4502 and start working towards getting a vehicle that you would then own to help them get them out of the house. There are programs with local dealerships like United Access where we do offer veterans discounts for rental vans. And there's companies, United Access is nationwide. There are other companies. Most of all have wheelchair accessible rental vans. And I would highly encourage, if you're looking to help just get them out, give them a break, looking into those programs and trying to get them back into some sort of life and get them to participate with the family again without having to purchase a full vehicle.
Thanks, Jeremiah. And I think, Joe, we're taking a stab at this one. It wasn't really a question, just neuropathy and Agent Orange, but we think we know what you're talking about. Joe, are you still there?
Yeah, I can't see the question.
it wasn't really a question. It's just they typed in neuropathy and Agent Orange.
Okay, so I think what that question means is, can a veteran get service connected? Again, that term, service connected, for neuropathy due to Agent Orange. Peripheral neuropathy is a little bit of an anomaly when it comes to Agent Orange. And what I mean by that is most Agent Orange related diseases, different types of cancer and diabetes and a whole host of other conditions, they have no presumptive period. And what I mean by that is, if someone is diagnosed with diabetes today and they served in Vietnam 40 years ago, they can get service connected for diabetes. And the same with different types of cancer and a whole host of other diseases. With peripheral neuropathy, the reason I said it's an anomaly is because it has to be early onset and it has to be diagnosed within 1 year. And 1 year is a standard presumptive period in the VA, meaning if individuals are diagnosed with any type of chronic disease, whether it's high blood pressure, respiratory issues, or any other chronic disease, if it's diagnosed within 1 year after discharge, the VA presumes it's related to military service. So like I said, with most Agent Orange diseases, there isn't that 1 year presumptive period. There is no period. However, with peripheral neuropathy, it's on the outset and it has to be diagnosed within 1 year after release from active duty.
Thanks, Joe. And two questions, the last two questions you did go over, but they're probably the most common questions we get. So I felt like it would be good to just go over them again. What is the time span now for replacement vehicles?
Right now, like I said at the outset, effective January 1st, 2023, if a veteran received the vehicle 30 more years ago, they're eligible now for the additional auto grant or replacement, as you put it. Starting January 1st, 2033, then if a veteran received the grant 10 years ago, they can get the replacement vehicle. And then every 10 years, another new vehicle. Is that what you're asking, Monique?
Yes, perfect. And then the last question, how often can the auto grants be used? A little different.
Well, starting in 2033, is every 10 years. So there is no limit.
Perfect.
So it can be,
Jeremiah, do you think,
depending upon how long, how old a veteran is, in 2033, if they decide to get a new vehicle every 10 years, then they can. But is there a limit, like 5 or 10? No.
Great. Jeremiah, a question came through specifically for Eddie. So we'll ask it if Eddie, you want to take this offline, you can take it offline. But Courtney asked, how would you advise processing requests for vehicle modification veterans who were outsourced to community providers? I recently came on board at my current VA site. They were without a provider until I boarded. Prosthetics had requested that needs to be submitted for vehicle modifications. How would you proceed? And if you want, I can get her your email, and if you want to email her separately.
I can answer it right now.
Okay.
So usually it's hard to answer this specifically, because when that order comes through for a community provider, is it for driving or is it for just a vehicle eval? That's a driver, okay? So let's say, for instance, if it's for driving, the first time to drive, and the community provider is the one that's doing the behind the wheel, the in-house provider, Courtney, if that's the case, should be doing the clinical evaluation and seeing if all those clinical check marks have been met for a behind the wheel evaluation, and what provider out there has that equipment that's appropriate. So let's say, for instance, the order comes through, veteran is a new 4502 patient, has it's a complete paraplegic and wants to get a conversion vehicle. So, Courtney could essentially do the in-house assessment, strength, range of motion, vision testing. If they have a simulator, great, right? And saying, hey, it looks like you need a mechanical hand control because you're strong enough. And our provider out there that does mechanical hand control in the community is, Frank, hypothetically. And then that consult goes to Frank, right? But let's say, for instance, Al says, hey, I need a new order. I need to get my new vehicle, right? And a patient that's been driving many, many years, no change of medical status, just needs a new assessment for their new vehicle. So then that order comes through, and then Courtney could go ahead and say, hey, let's schedule this as a video appointment. And Courtney does the evaluation video with Al and says, hey, Al, what type of equipment do you use? And Al says, I use mechanical push-pull hand control on my left side with a spinner knob at 2 o'clock position. And again, guys, sorry if this is over your head for the equipment, the prescription, but that's the jargon that I use with my patients, and the end user should be familiar with that as well. So I say, okay, that looks good. It says here that you're on the medical chart that there's no issues with your upper extremities, and that your level of injury is present, that you have trunk stability. So I'm thinking already what is needed for driving. What was your other vehicle before? Oh, I use a Toyota Sienna. Okay, so do you have a transfer seat in there? Yes, I have a transfer seat in there. Okay, how do you transfer? So you see it as a clinician, I don't have to do it physically. I could just ask those questions and know in the medical history that this veteran could do it. I might have to, which I always do, hey, put the video there and show me a transfer. Great. Okay, can you show me your hands? Can you show me that you could do the motion of pushing forward for brake and pulling back for gas? And can you show me your range of motion for steering? So essentially, I'm doing everything that someone will be doing for the functional capability for driving, but mocking it with a demo. So I may not have to outsource it to a community care provider to say the same thing. It's one, doesn't have to use that resource for the community care provider, and two, it saves another appointment, another travel for that veteran so that they can get their vehicle ready. If Courtney wants to get a hold of me directly and ask more detail, I'm more than willing, but that's pretty much, I want to say that in a nutshell, but that's how you would be answering that question per se.
Awesome. Thanks, Eddie. And thanks for everybody. Like we mentioned a couple times, this was a lot of information. And thank you to Eddie and Joe and Al and Jeremiah for sharing your experiences and your knowledge. And what we hope moving forward is that with resources in your community, you know who to go to and work together as a team to get the benefits that you deserve, whether it be PVA, your mobility dealer, other paralyzed veterans, but we're all here for you and want to get you back on the road and back on the road safely. So appreciate your time and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, guys.